Part 23. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wu Nian. Chapter 221. From the moment Chen Tao took him out of the restaurant and into the pitch-black space, He Ming had already felt strong fear. He Ming realized that he had stepped on hard scum this time. Everyone knows that if you want to use wormhole transportation, you must analyze the body into molecules before entering the wormhole for transportation. Just now, He Ming was indeed transported by the wormhole, but the problem was that He Ming did not allow others to analyze his body at all. The man named Chen Tao in front of him was obviously him. He forcibly analyzed He Ming and analyzed He Ming's body into molecules before carrying it. During this process, He Ming could not even react. It is extremely difficult to forcefully analyze others and then carry out wormhole transportation. And He Ming's body is already the 5th generation of genes, and the amount of data his body possesses is unimaginable. If others want to forcibly analyze it without He Ming's own permission, in the past, it would be the same as it's just like an idiot's dream, it's impossible. But now it's happening. Chen Tao can analyze his body, which means that Chen Tao can kill him at any time. When He Ming was transported here by the wormhole, He Ming had already realized that he could not be the opponent of the man in front of him. But when he saw his body cut into 2 pieces, He Ming was shocked again. He has the 5th generation gene body, and he has not yet been able to find anything in this world that can hurt him. But now his body was cut in 2 by Chen Tao. He Ming looked at the weapon that cut off his body. It was a pitch-black blade that looked like a crescent moon. It was a pitch-black half-moon blade. Seeing the weapon, He Ming narrowed his eyes. Analysis, He Ming opened the other world. I want to use the power of the other world to analyze that weapon. The weapon did not pause time because it entered He Ming's other world. Instead, it maintained its original appearance and slashed at He Ming's body. He Ming's body, which had been broken into 2 parts, was slashed wildly by the dark half-moon blade. He Ming was unable to use the other world to stabilize the half-moon blade, but the celestial computer behind him named Black Sky helped him collect some information about the weapon. He Tian's mechanical voice sounded in He Ming's mind. The object does not belong to the matter of the known universe. It is programmed by a computer and is a conceptual weapon. Concept weapon? He Ming's heart condensed. Concept weapon? Concept weapon, He Ming knew this thing. The celestial computer has the ability to program matter. It can program matter, and naturally it can program weapons. Weapons programmed by the celestial computer can program definitions. And weapons that have a definition are called concept weapons. He Ming also often writes conceptual weapons to bully the weak. But Gu Haiming knew that even if he used Black Sky, the most powerful celestial computer in the 6th universe, he could not program a weapon that could cut off the 5th generation genome. How is it possible? It's actually a concept weapon. He Ming had a trace of disbelief on his face. He said, Krishna, analyze it. Krishna said, instruction received. Parsing. At the same time this sound sounded. Chen Tao also heard the voice of Xing Yun. Someone is trying to analyze the half-moon blade. A mechanical voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind, do you want to stop it? Hearing this, Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, stop it? After receiving the instruction, turn on the protection mode and stop the analysis. Nebula's mechanical voice came. He Ming heard the voice of Krishna. Analysis 0.1%. 0.2%. Too slow. He Ming frowned. Haishan is the most powerful celestial computer in the universe of He Ming, and its data processing capabilities are extremely powerful. But He Ming never expected that He Tian would be so slow to analyze such a conceptual weapon. This means one thing, the amount of data used by the concept weapon is so huge that even with Haishan's data processing capabilities, it would be difficult. Is this still a concept weapon? The analysis was interfered with and the other party created a protective shield. Ming was startled and said, "Analyze the protective shield." Received the order and began to analyze the protective shield. Parsing failed, the protection shield is encrypted and cannot be parsed. Crack the code. Receive instructions and start cracking the code. Cracking the code. The progress of cracking the password is 1 billionth, and the estimated time is 1000 years. Hearing this, Ming was stunned. How is it possible? Ming knew very well just now that it was the celestial computer behind him, competing with the technology of the celestial computer held by Chen Tao. But the results are clear. The celestial computer technology possessed by Ming was hung up and beaten by the opponent. Not an opponent at all. The black half-moon blade has not yet been cracked, and the control of the half-moon blade is still in Chen Tao's hands. In the process, Ming's body had been chopped into pieces by the half-moon blade and scattered in the universe. Ming's body suddenly disappeared. Appearing out of thin air again, his body appeared completely in front of Chen Tao. After reaching the 5th-generation gene body, let alone being chopped into pieces, even if it is broken into molecules, it can be restored. Chen Tao looked at Ming in front of him, and the black half-moon blade returned to Chen Tao and surrounded him. Chen Tao looked at Ming and said, "Sure enough, it is still a bit difficult to destroy the 5th-generation gene body by destroying the body." Chen Tao said lightly, "In this case, I will chop you into pieces, and then isolate you with technology and throw you into every corner of the universe. What do you think?" When Ming heard this, his face changed drastically, and he said, "No, no, I admit defeat." Ming looked at Chen Tao with a smile and said, "I just wanted to make you angry, so I did that. I didn't mean to hurt your relatives, don't worry, don't worry." Humph! Chen Tao snorted coldly and said, "You said it, do you want to take it back now?" Chen Tao raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! With a crisp sound. A transparent cube wrapped up the space where Chen Tao and Ming were. This space was completely blocked. Ming was startled. He looked around and his face changed drastically. He looked at Chen Tao fiercely, "What did you do?" Chen Tao said calmly, "Now in this space, it is cut off from the outside world. You can't contact your celestial computer in this space, nor can you use the genetic ability in your body. In other words, I will break you into pieces now, and you can't put them together again. When the time comes, I will throw your pieces of meat into the universe." He stared at Ming and said, "Although you will still be alive at that time, I believe it will be no different from being dead. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 222. Ming's face was pale, his pupils trembling. He said, "Do you really want to do this?" Chen Tao narrowed his eyes and stared at Ming. "You can only blame yourself for saying something you shouldn't have said." Ming's face was as pale as paper, he swallowed his saliva, his expression was a little panic. He said, "No, no, no. I beg you, I was wrong, I apologize to you. Whatever you want, as long as I have it, I will give it to you. Don't treat me like that. I don't want to be sealed yet." Looking at Ming's panicked look, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and a smile slowly appeared on his cold face, saying, "Don't worry, I just lied to you." Ming was stunned, he looked at Chen Tao blankly. What? Chen Tao said, I said, I just lied to you. I don't have any deep hatred with you, and it's not worth it to do such a thing to you. I'm doing this now just to scare you, just like you threatened me with my woman." He looked at Ming with interest. Ming laughed dryly a few times, wiped the sweat off his face, and said, "Is this so? Otherwise, what do you think?" Chen Tao looked at Ming and said lightly, "Do you think I'm the kind of person who would throw you into the corner of the universe and make you live a life worse than death just because of 2 words?" Ming laughed dryly a few times. "No, you are definitely not." Chen Tao raised his hand. The space next to him dissipated. Feeling that he could reconnect with Haitian, Haiming breathed a sigh of relief. Since Haiming became a fifth-generation gene, he felt that he was invincible and felt that he could walk sideways in the entire universe. Even if he met a strong man with the same fifth-generation gene, Haiming was confident that he could fight with the other party. Even if he couldn't beat him, he could leave whenever he wanted, and the other party couldn't stop him. But at this moment, Haiming felt an unprecedented sense of fear. The man in front of him could actually shut down the genetic function in his body at will and interrupt his connection with Haitian. If this man wanted to touch him, he would live a life worse than death. What a devilish man! Haiming looked at Chen Tao and felt a little scared. Chen Tao looked at Haiming and said, "What about you? Go back to where you came from. Don't make trouble in my universe. Otherwise, the joke just now will not be a joke." Haha, okay, okay. Haiming laughed dryly a few times, and hurriedly touched the back of his head and said okay several times. Looking at Haiming's silly look, Chen Tao retracted his sight and disappeared on the spot. Looking at the place where Chen Tao disappeared out of thin air, Haiming smacked his lips. The sixth generation of gene body is really not a legend. Haiming felt cold sweat on his back, but he hadn't felt such fear for a long time, but today he did. Haiming said, "Fortunately, he is not that kind of vicious person, otherwise I would be finished." Haiming turned around, waved his hand, opened a cosmic crack, walked in, and disappeared in the dark universe. Chen Tao left Haiming with an impression that made him feel scared. It is estimated that Haiming has to think about it when he comes to this universe in the past few decades. At the same time, Chen Tao returned to the dining hall. Seeing Chen Tao coming back. What happened? Lin was the first to speak. She was still very concerned about this kind of thing. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked around and looked at the girl's inquiring eyes. Chen Tao said, "Drive away." "Well." Rose smiled and said, "It's worthy of the man I fell in love with." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Okay, after dinner, go and get busy. I've almost finished eating, so I won't accompany you." Well. After Chen Tao finished speaking, he left and walked towards his bedroom. Chen Tao heard a voice halfway. "Tao," it was Valia's voice. Chen Tao said, "What's wrong?" Valia said, "Just now I sensed a huge amount of information entering our universe, and then ran to your side." "Did anything happen?" Chen Tao said, "That was a person from the outer universe, who came to trouble me. I scared him away, and I guess he won't come back for a while." Hearing this, there was silence for a while. "What do you plan to do?" Valia's voice came. Chen Tao said, "No plan, we will deal with it as soon as it comes." "Haha, this is quite like what you do." Valia smiled gently and spoke slowly, revealing the unique majesty of a queen. Valia continued, "If I guess correctly, after this one leaves, there will be another one to cause trouble. Those people are very powerful, at least with the strength of the fifth generation of genes. It is difficult to manage such a strong person. Only you can handle it with absolute certainty." Speaking of this, Valia paused, and she said, "Tao, I saw the matter of celestial computers from the Dragon King's Academy. Currently in the Dragon civilization, there are only 2 celestial computers, one in Kati's hands and one in Bai Yao's hands. Tao, I also need a celestial computer to improve my strength, so as to deal with the enemies from outside the universe. What do you think?" Chen Tao's heart moved. Celestial computer? Indeed, the role of celestial computers is not small. Although the genome also has genetic functions, if you want to process a large amount of data, you can't do it without a celestial computer. If a technological battle like the one just now occurs, Valia, who has no astronomical computer, will be defeated. Valia handles the Dragon civilization on behalf of Chen Tao, and she may enter the front-line battlefield at any time. Indeed, she must have an astronomical computer. Otherwise, unexpected situations may occur at any time and anywhere. Chen Tao's heart condensed slightly. It seems that he did not think it through. If it were someone else, it would be fine, but she is Valia, not only the person who manages the dragon civilization on behalf of Chen Tao, but also Chen Tao's wife. If something happens to her, it is unacceptable for Chen Tao. Valia's request made Chen Tao realize the seriousness of the problem. Chen Tao said, "I didn't think it through. Okay, I'll find a way. If you meet people from the alien universe, don't go looking for trouble with them, tell me about them, and I'll go and play with them." I know, Valia's voice sounded. Listening to Valia's voice, Chen Tao's eyes became gentler, and he said, "I'll go find you tonight, remember to take a shower and wait for me." "Well, okay." Valia's voice was so indifferent, but there was a little tremor in the indifferent voice. Chen Tao could still feel this tremor. Chen Tao smiled. Although Valia had a queen's posture, she was just like a little girl in matters between men and women. This was somewhat similar to Katie, but Valia felt more traditional. Perhaps it was because Valia came from the era of cold weapons. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 223. Hang up the call with Valia. Chen Tao also went to the bedroom. He looked at the French window and the scenery outside. He looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside through the window. He slowly closed his eyes and murmured, "A celestial computer. Astronomical computer." At present, the only celestial computer Chen Tao has is the nebula. When Chen Tao upgraded to the Genesis gene, he obtained various data of the universe. He could understand many things and write them at the same time. Astronomical computer, Chen Tao can also write it. But there is a problem. At present, Chen Tao does not know what level of celestial computer he can write. How does it compare to the world tree? He is not sure. I want to give Valia a celestial computer so that she can have technology as a guarantee. This matter is related to Valia's life. If I want to give it to her, I will give her the best. Chen Tao's body disappeared out of thin air. When he appeared again, he appeared in the vast universe. The reason why the celestial computer is called this is because the computer is as huge as a celestial body. Large mass will generate gravity. In order to avoid accidents, the celestial computer must be given enough space and location. This vast universe is naturally a suitable place. Time stopped flowing. Everything turned into blue code. Chen Tao couldn't see his own eyes. If someone outside looked, they could see that Chen Tao's eyes were already glowing with blue. Chen Tao could write a celestial computer by himself, but it was not possible. Even with the genes of creation, Chen Tao was not as good as Nebula in processing data. If he wanted to write the most powerful celestial computer that could be written at present, he could only let Nebula write it. Chen Tao said, "Nebula, write me the best celestial computer to the extent you can do it now." Received the order, Nebula's mechanical voice sounded. Writing. In the empty void ahead, rows of blue codes appeared. It looked like someone was typing on the keyboard, entering the code symbols of 0 and 1. Those codes were very fast and filled the empty void quickly. The amount of data required to write a celestial computer is unimaginable. Judging from the situation, it will probably take some time. Chen Tao asked, "How long will it take to write it?" Xingyun's mechanical voice sounded, "With the current performance of Xingyun, it will take 30 years to write the most powerful celestial computer recorded in the Xingyun database." Chen Tao took a breath. Although Chen Tao pursues the best, these 30 years. Chen Tao can't stand it. This is not what Chen Tao can stand. Chen Tao said, "What is the performance of the celestial computer that can be produced in 30 years?" the performance is slightly worse than mine. At the same time, due to the limitations of my database, I can't use the device to travel through time, Xingyun said. Hearing this, Chen Tao was silent for a while. 30 years, too tormenting. Although time is still in the inner world of Xingyun, Chen Tao is alive, and Chen Tao is not still. Let Chen Tao wait for 30 years. This is too fatal. Chen Tao said, I fought with the man named He Ming before, and you competed with the astronomical computer behind him in technology. If I want you to make an astronomical computer with the same performance as He Ming's astronomical computer, how long will it take you? Xingyun's mechanical voice sounded, 5 months. 5 months. It seems that the astronomical computer that Xingyun is going to make, which is slightly inferior to it, can completely beat the strongest astronomical computers in this universe in terms of performance. Chen Tao said, then spend 4 more months. I need a computer with more powerful performance than He Ming's astronomical computer. Received the order. Change the writing method. Rewrite. The mechanical voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Chen Tao looked at the dark void and sighed slightly. Do you have to spend a full 9 months in this time full of blue codes? However, thinking back, it is. Astronomical computers, how can that thing be so simple? Chen Tao thought about it, and his figure walked away and walked to another dark void. He also began to write new data and a new astronomical computer. Since he had to face this boring time, he might as well write an astronomical computer himself and treat it as learning. It was too long. 9 months. For those who are used to walking around, staying at home for 3 days without anyone talking is enough to make them feel uncomfortable. And Chen Tao is also used to living with someone, and he has to stay here for 9 months. That's too much. Chen Tao spent 3 months writing an astronomical computer. He didn't know the performance of this thing, but he could only make an astronomical computer like this. After finishing it, there were 6 months left, and he felt more boring than ever. When he was free, he spread his perception and immersed himself in the senses of the universe, feeling everything that the universe could feel. Unconsciously, the boredom was gone, and the feeling was gone. Chen Tao could see the blue data of the entire universe. The entire universe is like a huge database that records countless things. Chen Tao sank into those databases and collected the data in the databases into his own database. When Chen Tao flipped through the data, he felt like he had entered an ocean of knowledge. Time passed by little without him noticing. Compilation completed. Just when Chen Tao's consciousness was wandering, a voice sounded, pulling Chen Tao's consciousness back. Chen Tao came back to his senses. He opened his eyes and looked around. Chen Tao saw a blue sphere as big as a satellite, emitting blue light, floating in front of him. This thing is somewhat similar to a nebula, but it is smaller than a nebula. It can be regarded as a miniature nebula. That's it? Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Time resumed. Chen Tao contacted Valia and said, "Baby, are you there?" Valia's voice came, "Huh? What's wrong?" hearing the faint doubt in Valia's voice. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Your celestial computer is done." Done? It's been less than 5 minutes since we just talked. Did you already have an idle celestial computer? No, if you did, you wouldn't let me use the Dragon King's Academy. Valia hesitated for a moment and said, "You use the inner world." Chen Tao smiled, "I didn't expect that. It's been less than a month and a half, and you have changed from a person in the cold weapon era to the knowledgeable you now. I am a little impressed." Valia didn't even understand gravity before, but now she suddenly realized the inner world that Chen Tao used. After all, Valia is different from Chen Tao. Chen Tao is based on the knowledge of pre-nuclear civilization, while Valia is in the real cold weapon era. She almost doesn't understand gravity. It's not so easy for her to accept these new knowledge that seems like a fairy tale in a short time. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 224. The knowledge I have learned during this period is not in vain, Vilya said lightly. Chen Tao said, well, do you have time now? Wei Lia said, this universe is mostly filled with trivial matters, relatively big things, which rarely appear. Basically trivial matters can be solved by Qin and Qiao. I just need to give them some advice. Simply put, most of the time, I'm free. Hearing this, Chen Tao felt quite sympathetic. Indeed, Chen Tao also discovered that many things in this universe were trivial before Wei Lia came. There are almost no big things, and trivial matters can only be dealt with in a few sentences. Chen Tao said, well, then I will use the wormhole to transport you here, don't be too surprised. Yeah, I understand, Vilya responded casually. Chen Tao raised his hand. Wei Lia's body appeared in Chen Tao's arms and was held by Chen Tao. Wei Lia was startled. She looked at Chen Tao and said, put me down. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia and said with a smile, if you think about it, you have to unlock it. Unlocked. Wei Lia's eyes were filled with confusion. Unlocked. Chen Tao looked into her eyes and his eyes fell on her small mouth. A blush appeared on Wei Lia's face. She came closer and kissed Chen Tao. Parted lips. There were two more blushes on Vilya's cheeks and she said, is this okay? Upon hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia, and he smiled slightly. It seems that what you learned in the Dragon King's Academy is not just technology. After saying that, he put her down. Wei Lia flapped the dragon wings behind her and flew in mid-air. She glanced at Chen Tao. Being smart, she naturally knew what Chen Tao was referring to. Wei Lia was born in the cold weapon era. To her, she was a pure warrior. But what Chen Tao just said to her had a hint of a couple. If Varia was still a pure warrior, she probably wouldn't understand. But now that Wei Lia understands it, it means that she has changed a little. Vilya said, of course, learning knowledge cannot be too one-sided. Her eyes fell on the blue light sphere in front of her, and she said, is that the celestial computer? Chen Tao said, well, next, you also get in touch with it and log in your information at the same time, so that it becomes yours. He looked at Wei Lia and said softly, can you use it? Wei Lia nodded slightly and said, I'll give it a try. She looked at the celestial computer. Chen Tao looked at this scene. He was not in a hurry, he just looked at Wei Lia. Vilya was still wearing the silver white armor as before. The armor was close-fitting and fit her moving figure. She held her waist tightly. Tall. Her long golden hair was tied into a single ponytail and draped behind her back, with silky hair. She has a beautiful face, and her fair skin looks so beautiful. Looking at the exquisite beauty in front of him, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Chen Tao has been in the other world for 9 months. Although it doesn't matter if he doesn't eat or drink at Chen Tao's level, there are some things that cannot be changed once they become habits. Although Chen Tao is not the kind of lecherous person, he saw Wei Lia again after 9 months. Sure enough, he still couldn't control himself. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt a blue light next to him. He turned his face sideways and found that the blue sphere that had just made any movement was slowly spinning at the moment. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly. This is connected. The celestial computer is actually just a larger computer. To start a celestial computer, you must have a controller. The gene body with gene function, that is, the human body, is equivalent to a controller. If it doesn't start, then nothing happens. But when the controller is connected and started, the celestial computer will naturally start running. It's running now. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Wei Lia. Wei Lia's eyes were filled with luster. She looked at Chen Tao and said, it seems to be connected. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, do you know how to use it? Wei Lia nodded slightly and said, I saw it at the Dragon King's Academy. Light, said Vilya. Bright? Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia. "Master, I'm here," a mechanical voice sounded. Chen Tao understood. This was the name Wei Lia gave to the celestial computer when it was connected to it. "Is it bright?" This is in line with Wei Lia's temperament. "Calculate how long Chen Tao will love me," Wei Lia asked aloud. When Chen Tao heard this, he was stunned and looked at Wei Lia. "What the hell is this problem? Can this issue still be resolved?" "Instruction received, calculation is in progress." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia. Wei Lia's face was as usual, without any expression. "Can this also be counted? What will be the calculated result? 1 year? 2 years? Or decades? Can one person's feelings for another remain unchanged? Probably not. After all, time will dilute everything. Will Villia be happy if she gets the answer? Not good." Chen Tao had a headache. "Based on how much Chen Tao likes you now, if there is no accident, his feelings for you will never change." The voice of the celestial computer sounded slowly. Chen Tao was startled when he heard this voice. When Villia heard it, her eyes were shining, and she turned her head slightly and looked at Chen Tao. The four eyes met. Chen Tao smiled. Chen Tao was very satisfied with the answer of Guangming. Villia pursed her lips, she retracted her sight, looked at the celestial computer in front of her, and said, "Can you hide and protect yourself?" "Yes, create a camouflage ring, so that I will disappear from the optical point of view, and no matter who it is impossible to find my existence." Guangming's mechanical voice sounded slowly. Villia nodded slightly and said, "You hide yourself and build a protective shield for yourself to protect yourself." Received the command, start execution. Writing. The blue light is bright, and the celestial computer is making something next to it. It is probably writing camouflage and protective shields. Villia retracted her gaze and looked at Chen Tao. She stepped closer to Chen Tao, looked into his eyes, raised her hand, gently stroked Chen Tao's face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Did you hear it? It calculated eternity, but can you do it? Love someone forever." Chen Tao looked at Villia, smiled, stretched out his hand, and held her horizontally in his arms. Villia looked at Chen Tao with big eyes. Chen Tao leaned close to her ear, smelled her hair, felt her body temperature, and whispered in her ear, "Eternity is too long, I want to love you now." Villia blushed slightly, slowly closed her eyes, and leaned her little head on Chen Tao's shoulder, saying, "I know that although you made it in the inner world, the time in the inner world is really passing. You must have endured it for a long time. Today I will not restrict you. Whatever you want to do, I will accompany you." Chen Tao's heart was warm. At this moment, he could not think of anything. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 225. After 1 day and 1 night. Chen Tao was finally satisfied. He lay on the bed, looked at the ceiling, and then looked out the window. It was already the next morning, and the light outside the window fell on the ground. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. "I haven't seen sunshine like this for 9 months, and it feels quite comfortable." He turned slightly sideways and looked to his side. Lying next to Chen Tao was Wei Lia. Villia closed her eyes. She had a beautiful face. There was not a single flaw on this face. It was so beautiful. Her long blonde hair naturally fell on the pillow behind her, matching her moving figure to outline a perfect pattern. Villia always wears a battle armor when she is outside. Although she looks good because of her figure, she is most feminine when she is not wearing a battle armor. That kind of beauty made Chen Tao unable to stop. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia's closed eyes and the narrow eyelashes on them. Chen Tao smiled, placed his hand on her cheek, picked up a few strands of hair on her cheek, and tucked it behind her ear. Wei Lia seemed to feel something, her eyelashes moved, and her eyes slowly opened, revealing those moving eyes. She raised her face slightly and looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Very close. Looking directly at the charming face in front of him, Chen Tao could see her laziness. The beauty who has just woken up is the most beautiful. Of course she is at her most beautiful now. Chen Tao leaned down and kissed her lips. After a long time, they slowly separated. Wei Lia's face turned red and she buried her little head in Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia's lazy and dependent look. He smiled and gently stroked her hair with his hand, falling on her back to comfort her. Vilya closed her eyes. I used to lead and control others. Only when I faced you did I realize that I could also be controlled by others. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, it's not always possible to control others. It's good to experience the feeling of being controlled by others. Wei Lia blushed and said, well, I think so too. Chen Tao kissed Wei Lia's forehead. The two of them were gentle and didn't speak. Some time passed. It's time for me to go. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, are you in such a hurry? Wei Lia said, there are still many things to deal with in the dragon civilization, and I can't leave for too long. Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. Indeed, there are too many trivial matters in dragon civilization. It's not easy for Wei Lia to leave either. Vilya got out of bed and put on her clothes. She reluctantly glanced at Chen Tao, then opened the miniature wormhole, entered the wormhole, and left. Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched as he looked at the moving figure of Vilyana disappearing into the micro wormhole. He also got up and put on his clothes. At the same time, in a planet in the universe, a group of people with dragon horns and wings set a flaming giant egg on fire. At this time, the dome shattered. A hand reaches out from the dome. Bang! With a muffled sound, the entire dome exploded. A red figure flew out of the dome. Looking closely, it was a woman with red dragon horns and wings. The woman was surrounded by flames. She said aloud, my name is Betty, and I am the king of Red Dragon. From today on, our Red Dragon clan will be led by me to return to the top of the universe and control the entire universe. Red Dragon King. Red Dragon King. There was a deafening roar throughout the valley. Betty spread her wings and flew upward. The other red dragons flew up one after another and flew towards the sky. Betty and others fly into the universe. A male red dragon man flew next to Betty, and he said to Betty, King, our family has been exiled to the barren land by Katina Bitch for more than 6 million years. In these more than 6 million years here, we have been paying attention to the changes in the universe. Now on the dragon civilization side, Katie and Bai Yao have retreated behind the scenes. The new dragon king is a human named Chen Tao. Betty said, humans. Are humans also qualified to rule the dragon civilization? The male red dragon is named Gomus. Gomus said, that human seems to have 6th generation genes. Betty narrowed her eyes, 6th generation gene? What is that? Gomus said, I don't know very well. Humph. Betty said lightly, I have integrated the abilities of the 3rd generation gene body and elemental body. Even sharp silver weapons cannot cause any harm to me. Katie's strongest weapon is nothing but sharp silver weapons. It's just a weapon. The human being who claims to have a 6th generation gene body is just a 6th generation gene body, haha. No matter how Katie upgrades her genetic body, what growth can she achieve in such a short period of time? Ridiculous. Starting from today, this universe will have to change hands. The king of the dragon civilization will be me, Betty. At the same time, inside the dragon man's hall, Vilya sat on a high chair, crossed her legs, and looked at the blue data in front of her. These data are projected by Vilya's newly acquired light celestial computer. The data comes from the entire known universe, and by observing the data, you can see everything that is happening in the known universe. There was too much data, so Vilya certainly wouldn't look at it one by one. She used the ability of light to mobilize the data that might threaten the balance of the universe. In this way, she could control the entire known universe and maintain the balance of the universe. Suddenly, a voice sounded. A genetic information with strong malice towards the dragon civilization was captured. The mechanical voice sounded in Valia's mind. Valia said, "Open the screen and take a look." A blue screen appeared in front of Valia. Through this screen, Valia could see a group of dragon people. Unlike the dragon people of the dragon civilization, the wings of these dragon people were all red. Seeing this, Valia's eyebrows stretched slightly. What is this? Analyzing. Analysis completed. They are the Red Dragon clan, a race born in the dragon civilization 6 million years ago. Because the patriarch had a strong sense of thugs, he even intended to overthrow Kadi's kingship. In the end, the matter was exposed and he was exiled by Kadi. Red Dragon clan? Valia's eyebrows stretched slightly. Looking at the red dragons in the picture, they were in a hurry. Valia probably guessed what they were thinking. Can't hold back in the place of exile, are you planning to come back again? Valia crossed her legs and entered the gene channel. Kadi. Valia, is there something wrong? Katie's voice came faintly. Valia said, yes, I need you to come to the Dragon Hall. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 226. A micro-wormhole opened, and Kadi appeared beside Valia. Valia glanced at Kadi, and then said, look. Kadi looked forward, and she saw the red dragon in the picture in front of her. Kadi frowned suddenly, and then stretched her eyebrows slightly. She said lightly, Betty, these guys were exiled to a deserted planet by me. I warned them that they must never leave that planet. It seems that they can't hold it back. Wait a minute. Kadi suddenly found something, and she said, zoom in a little bit. The picture zoomed in. As soon as the picture zoomed in, Kadi could see the appearance of those people carefully. Kadi found that there were flames on those people's bodies, and the flames surrounded their bodies. It seemed that the flames were part of their bodies. See this? Kadi frowned suddenly and said, no wonder they dared to come here, so this is the case. Valia said, Flame, what's going on? Are all red dragons like this? Kadi said, red dragons are not like this. It seems that the bodies of these red dragons have undergone a special upgrade. They have merged their own genetic bodies with elemental bodies. Is it difficult to deal with? Valia said. Kadi's eyebrows stretched slightly, she crossed her arms, looked at Valia, and said, I can go and play with them. Hearing this, Valia's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, it seems that they are not difficult to deal with. Dragon Joe. I'm here. Dragon Joe's voice came. Valia said lightly, there is a group of red dragons near the Grey civilization, and they are planning to threaten our dragon civilization. You take your team and teach them a lesson. Yes. Kadi was also in the gene channel, and of course he could hear Valia's voice. Kadi looked at Valia. Valia crossed his legs, crossed his arms, and looked at the picture above. Seeing this scene, Kadi retracted his gaze. In the picture, Betty led a group of red dragons and roamed in this vast universe. Suddenly, 3 micro-wormholes opened in front of this terrifying red dragon army. Betty stopped flying and raised her hand. Everyone stopped. 3 female dragons walked out of the micro-wormhole. The female dragon looked at the people in front. Seeing the 3 female dragons in front of her, Betty's eyes shone with a glimmer. She crossed her arms and showed a playful smile, saying, so? Is the dragon civilization so declining now? Facing our red dragon army, you can only send 3 little girls who are still wet behind the ears. Dragon Joe looked at Betty, and she said lightly, Red Dragon King Betty, my king has ordered you to go back to Balstar immediately, and we can forgive the past. If you don't go back, then this vast universe will be your burial place. Haha, Betty laughed. She looked at Dragon Joe playfully, and said, it's really interesting, Katie didn't dare to talk to me like this before, and who are you? How dare you talk to me like this? Dragon Joe looked at Betty expressionlessly, with a cold look. Betty narrowed her eyes. Huh. Don't know what's good for you. Little, Frey, Baze and Betty said 3 names lightly. 3 male red dragons flew out of the team. Litar was as strong as a bear, holding a broadsword burning with flames. Frey was not as strong as Litar, with long red hair and a high hairline, and he also held a broadsword in his hand. Bison was tall and thin, with hair as long as a woman's, and a thin face, with the outline of bones visible. Betty stared at Longren Joe and said lightly, I won't bully you either. It's 3 against 3. If you win, I can let you go. If you lose, don't blame me. As she said that, Betty crossed her arms and her eyes were indifferent. Longren Joe snorted coldly and said, sisters, go. The 3 of them spread their wings and flew over. Litar faced Longren Joe and slashed at him with the broadsword in his hand. Bang! The broadsword collided with the longsword in Longren Joe's hand. Longren Joe was blown away by the terrifying force and his body flew out. Litar raised the broadsword and chased after him fiercely. On the other side, the other 2 sisters also faced each other, Frey and Bazin. The battle was about to start. Litar's attack was very fast. It was so fast that Longren Jiao had no chance to counterattack. He could only passively defend with his weapon, but in this way, he was suppressed and beaten. Longren Jiao gritted his teeth, facing Litar's attack again. She held the hilt of the sword with both hands and raised it. Too slow, Litar snorted coldly. The moment Longren Jiao raised his hand, a knife was draped on Longren Jiao. The armor on Longren Jiao lit up. Longren Jiao's petite body was blown away by the power. This armor is immune to mental power and physical attacks, which can perfectly protect Longren Jiao from harm, but the power still exists. Longren Jiao flew out with this power. Litar's expression changed slightly, and he frowned suddenly. What happened? While flying out, Longren Jiao waved the longsword in his hand. A white light lit up, and a white lightning bolt struck Litar. Ah! Litar screamed. The whole person was covered by lightning. Not long after, Litar's body turned into white mist and dissipated. Dragon Manjiao exhaled, and she looked at her companions. Her 2 companions were also suppressed and beaten. She swung her long sword. Thunder and lightning lit up. Zizi. Ah! Frey's body turned into mist. Dragon Manjiao swung his long sword again. Bison's body was also struck by thunder and lightning, turned into white mist, and dissipated. After dealing with the 3 people, Dragon Manjiao's side fell on Betty in front of him. It's your turn, Dragon Manjiao said lightly. Betty frowned slightly. What are you talking about? Your battle is not over yet. As the words fell, a little bit of red flame began to condense from all directions. Transformed into 3 human figures. Little, Frey and Bison, the 3 of them reappeared in front of Dragon Manjiao and his 3 daughters. Dragon Manjiao was slightly startled, and her face changed slightly. What's going on? Litar clenched the broadsword in his hand, looked at Dragon Manjiao, and said, we red dragons have evolved, and we will not die now. Facing us who will not die, what are you going to do? Dragon Manjiao's expression became more solemn. The opponent is a combination of genetic body and elemental body. At this time, the voice of Valia sounded in Dragon Manjiao's head. Valia said, it's not that they will not die, but we have to find the core and destroy it. Elemental body? Core. Dragon Manjiao frowned. Dragon Manjiao had encountered elemental bodies before, and had fought with them, but at that time, she was not the opponent of the elemental body, and was even saved by Chen Tao. It is not an easy task to find the core from the elemental body. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 227. Dragon Manchiao said, Chi Yu. I just got the information that the red dragon people are no longer a pure genetic body, but a collection of genetic bodies and elemental bodies. To kill them, we must find their core. Looking for the core, Long Renaya glanced at Long Renqiao and said, how to find it? Hearing this, Long Renqiao frowned and shook his head, I don't know that either. Have you finished talking? At this time, a cold voice sounded. Dragon Manchiao's eyes fell on Li Tal. Li Tal was covered in flames, staring at Dragon Manchiao and said, keep fighting. He roared, and the broad knife in his hand caused a wave of fire. He rushed towards Long Renqiao again, and the fire knife slashed directly at Long Renqiao. Dragon Manchiao stepped back suddenly. At the moment of retreating, he waved the long sword in his hand. Thunder and lightning shot out. Zi! Bang! Li Tal's body was hit and turned into black coal again. When Li Tal pounced, Frey and Bai Sen also found their opponents. And the two female dragons also learned some experience. Seeing the opponent approaching, they did not use their strength, but chose to retreat, keep distance, and then used the thunder sword to directly chop the opponent into slag with lightning. Betty's eyebrows wrinkled slightly. The scattered flames once again took the form of a human, but it was different from last time. This time, only Li Tal and Bai Sen gathered. Frey, Betty called out. But didn't get any response. Betty frowned. See this? Dragon Manchiao and the three girls looked at each other. They understood immediately. The core is in the opponent's body. If you attack the opponent, you will have a chance to destroy the opponent's core. That guy Frey is obviously not very lucky. But this time, Long Renqiao finally found a way to attack. The three of them are already in the same team and have a good understanding of each other. But after realizing the attack method, the three of them left and separated. The long sword was pointed at Li Tal and Bai Sen. Li Tal and Bai Sen's expressions changed slightly. Three thunderbolts struck the two of them. Boom boom boom. Raiden makes frequent attacks. The two of them were directly blasted into pieces, and at the same time, without knowing it, the core in their bodies was also shattered. Dragon Manchiao put away his sword and looked around. Seeing that no flames had condensed again, Dragon Manchiao squinted his eyes, looked at Betty, and said, it's your turn now. Betty's face sank, seeking death. Suddenly, three miniature wormholes appeared next to Dragon Manchiao and the others. Three silver chains appeared, trapping the three of them together with their hands and feet. His hands and feet were trapped, and Dragon Manchiao could not move. The super concept armors Chen Tao gave them were immune to physical attacks and mental attacks, but the problem was that they were not immune to restraints. When the three women couldn't move, Betty raised her hand and shook it. The flames roared, and the flames condensed into a giant fire knife that was 20 meters long. Betty said calmly, this fire knife is condensed by me using highly compressed flames. Even the third-generation gene body will be melted in front of it. You can go on your way with peace of mind. Betty waved her hand and swung the knife to slash at the three women. Die, Betty's voice was cold. The fire knife rolled past the three women's bodies. The fire knives scattered. Betty looked at the three women indifferently, as if looking at three corpses. Upon seeing it, Betty was slightly startled. The three women were still tied up, but their demeanor did not change at all. Different from Betty's imagination, in Betty's opinion, these three women should have been melted after the fire knife passed by. What's going on? Dragon Manchiao struggled hard for a while, but still couldn't break free of the chain made of tough silver. She frowned, stared at Betty, and said lightly, if you want to kill us, Just rely on your fire-breaking knife. Not qualified. Betty frowned. It's impossible, there's no way in the known universe that anyone can resist the attack I just made. Dragon Man Chiao said, you have been on that backward planet for so long that you can no longer keep up with anything. What do your attacks mean? As for you people, our king is just too lazy to pay attention to you. If you are willing to take action, your bones will be gone by now. King, by sending the three of us to deal with you, I already think highly of you, Dragon Man Chiao said lightly. Humph, Betty said, even if I can't move you, you can't move your body either. Many of my men are still single, and they are quite interested in you black dragons. You tell me, if I move you give it to my men to play with, what will happen to you quickly? Dragon Man Chiao's face turned pale, he gritted his teeth and said, you are shameless. The corners of Betty's mouth raised slightly and she said, I don't have that much etiquette when it comes to my enemies. As for you, I just like to see you feel uncomfortable. See this scene through the screen. Vilaya frowned and stood up slowly. See this. Don't worry, Katie's voice came from beside her. Vilaya looked at Katie. Katie crossed her arms and said, Dragon Joe, it's not just that. There was a glint in Vilaya's eyes, and she slowly sat down and continued to watch. Dragon Joe looked at Betty and she said, do you think you've trapped me? Betty crossed her arms and said, what do you think? You don't mean to say that you can break free from this tough silver chain? Dragon Man Joe stared at Betty and said lightly, why not? As he spoke, a huge lightning bolt as thick as a bucket came from above and hit Dragon Man Joe directly. Boom! A white light lit up, illuminating the surroundings. Sister Chiao, Dragon Man Yu and Dragon Man Chi, you couldn't help but be stunned. Suicide, Betty frowned as she watched this scene. The white light slowly dissipated. The figure of Dragon Man Joe emerged. She had no injuries on her body, but the tough silver chain around her was gone. Betty's face changed slightly. You. This guy attacked her with lightning, and because of the armor on her body, she was immune to damage, but the tough silver rope on her body did not have this property. She was fine, but the tough silver rope was broken into pieces. Dragon Joe looked at Betty and said, next, it's your turn. Dragon Joe spread his dragon wings behind him and pounced into the crowd. Betty's face changed when she saw this scene. Disperse. Too late, Dragon Joe said coldly, lightning engine, maximum output. Boom. A huge and terrifying lightning came down from above, targeting Dragon Joe. Because the lightning was so huge, the red dragons around Dragon Joe were also covered in the range. This lightning engine was invented by Lei Hao. When it is at its most powerful, it can even split a planet in half. And at this moment, realizing that lightning would not pose a threat to him, Dragon Joe let himself go. He turned the lightning engine to its strongest. Accompanied by a loud bang. White light enveloped the surroundings. In the Dragon Hall, the whole scene in front of Vilya and Kati was white. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 228. Vilya took a deep breath and said, as expected of a pure warrior, I feel cold all over. Kati looked at Vilya, she smiled and said, what's the big deal? If you go up, those people will scream too. Kati retracted her gaze and looked at the picture in front of her. Betty, in fact, she is also becoming stronger with her own abilities. She can fuse the genetic body and the elemental body. I didn't expect this. If we hadn't met Chen Tao, Betty would have been able to threaten us. Unfortunately, during this period, the appearance of Chen Tao has brought a qualitative leap in the improvement of our technology. Compared with the current dragon civilization, Betty is far behind. Vilya said lightly, with backward technology, we can only be beaten. This is reality. I hope she can accept this reality calmly. Hearing this, Katie smiled, I'm afraid she can't accept it. The white light dispersed. The picture can also be seen. The group of red dragons just now has a large number of missing people, and the others all ran away. Not long after, the entire vast universe returned to peace. All of a sudden, the entire screen was left with only the vast space and the three people of Dragon Manjo. Seeing this, Valia entered the gene channel and said, "Well done, come back." "Yes," Dragon Manjo responded. Kadi crossed his arms and looked at Valia. Valia said, "Guangming, can you find the information of Red Dragon King Betty?" Received the order, searching for the information of Red Dragon King Betty. Searching, search ended. The search results show that the information of Red Dragon King Betty appeared in the Earth star civilization of the solar system. Valia was slightly startled. Earth star civilization? Yes. Valia subconsciously looked at Kadi. Kadi smiled, "Then this matter is considered to be settled, and the rest is left to you. See you next time." She opened a micro wormhole and walked away. Seeing this, Valia retracted her gaze and contacted Chen Tao. At the same time, in the Earth star civilization of the solar system, Chen Tao was free, so he went for a walk outside. Now he was walking in Yuehu manner to see the scenery of Yuehu. Tao. Hearing the voice from the gene channel, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he said, "Dear." Valia said, "Well, we just fought an interstellar war with the Red Dragon. The Red Dragon King Betty probably jumped to the Earth through a wormhole. I thought you were on Earth, so I told you." Red Dragon King, Chen Tao was a little confused. While talking, Chen Tao felt a light coming from the side, and he looked up. He found that above, an object wrapped in flames was like a meteorite, sliding down from the sky and flying towards the side. Valia said, "Yes, Red Dragon King, the Red Dragon clan was originally a dragon civilization, but because the Red Dragon clan wanted to overthrow Kadi's rule and attempted to be discovered, they were exiled. They had planned to come here and attack the dragon civilization." Boom. A loud noise. 5 meters in front of Chen Tao, there was a huge pit. The pit was emitting flames. Looking at the pit in front of him, Chen Tao was silent for a moment. He said to Valia, "I think I already know where she is. Leave this to me." "Okay." Chen Tao hung up the call, walked to the pit, and looked down from above. In the pit, there was a girl lying. The girl was small and looked about 14 or 15 years old. She had long red hair, a pair of red dragon horns on her head, and dragon wings behind her. Her skin was as white as cream, and her figure was slender and attractive. A face, delicate and flawless, beautiful and seductive. So small. Is this the Red Dragon King? Chen Tao went down from the pit and landed beside the girl. He squatted down, looked at the girl, then raised his hand and pinched the girl's cheek. The girl frowned in pain. She opened her eyes, revealing a pair of ruby-like pupils. She suddenly turned her face to look at Chen Tao. "Who are you? Where is the king? Where is the king?" The girl slapped Chen Tao's hand away and stood up quickly. She stared at Chen Tao. "How dare you be rude to the king? Wait a minute." "Ah!" the girl screamed. She quickly covered her chest with her hands, turned sideways, her eyes were a little panic. She looked at Chen Tao, and said, "What did you do to the king? How did the king's body become so small? And where are the king's clothes?" The girl was panicked and looked a little at a loss. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao could be sure that this was the Red Dragon King. It is estimated that some accidents have caused her to become what she is now. Chen Tao looked at the girl, stood up, and said, "I didn't do anything to you. It was you who flew over here for no reason and messed up my manner. How are you going to compensate me?" The girl was startled. She looked around. She bit her lip, frowned, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "You still want me to compensate you? You have seen my body naked. If it were in the past, I would have slapped you to death. You, Hurry up and put on your clothes, you are still looking. She was angry, and her baby face was flushed. Watching this scene, Chen Tao was happy. He took out a shirt and handed it to the girl. The girl stretched out her hand, took it, and hurriedly put it on. The shirt covered the girl's upper body, but not other places. And the hem of the shirt is very short. The girl's face flushed, and she looked at Chen Tao with big eyes and said, "Pants, pants." Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at the girl, and said, "I don't have pants for little girls." The girl puffed up her face angrily and said, You. She was very angry and was about to do something, but she seemed to realize something and her face swelled up with anger. Betty found that she couldn't contact her gene function, and the celestial computer behind her couldn't contact it either. In other words, Betty is now not much different from ordinary people. She wanted to teach the rude man in front of her a lesson, but she couldn't do it at all. Betty is not stupid. After a brief panic, she also understood the situation. At that time, when Dragon Joe was using lightning, Betty was closest. At that moment, Betty opened a micro wormhole and planned to jump through the wormhole. But when using it, Dragon Joe's lightning also came down. It is estimated that by coincidence, part of her genes were gone, and only part of her genes were left, which were reorganized. This led to such a situation. After realizing this, Betty felt a little overwhelmed. But there was no way. Betty looked at Chen Tao and said, "I'm telling you, I'm Betty, the Red Dragon King. As long as you listen to me now and be my subordinate, when I recover my ability, you can get whatever you want." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Betty and said, "Really?" Betty nodded and said, "Really?" Chen Tao looked at Betty and looked at Betty's slender figure. Betty was startled, she quickly turned sideways, blocked her body, and said, "What are you doing? Are you a Lolita control? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 229. Seeing Betty's reaction, Chen Tao felt very interesting. Betty speaks with a milky voice and has a small figure. She is so small and talks to Chen Tao with a milky voice. It feels great. Chen Tao had some leisure time during this period, but he was also very bored. It's rare to encounter something interesting now, and of course he won't throw away the fun so easily. Chen Tao said with a smile, "You guessed it right, I am a lolicon." Betty's face turned red. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "No, I can't. You can ask for something else. Then when I regain my ability, I will give you whatever you want. If you want a little girl, I will give it to you. Can you find a few hundred?" Chen Tao smiled evilly and said, "Do you think that when a top-notch Lolita is in front of a lolicon, that lolicon will still think about what happens next?" He stepped closer to Betty, and Betty stepped back. She looked at Chen Tao nervously. Don't mess around. I tell you, I am the Red Dragon King, and I am the Red Dragon King Betty. You dare to touch me?" Her little foot tripped on a stone and her body fell backwards. Betty was stunned and turned pale. Suddenly, Betty felt her waist tighten and her body feel light. Betty came back to her senses and found herself being held in the arms of this man. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, "Be careful, don't fall." Betty was stunned for a moment, her eyes widened as she looked at the face of the man so close to her. "Ah! Let me go." Betty struggled in Chen Tao's arms, but Chen Tao held her tighter, making her unable to move. Betty's face turned pale, her big eyes looked at Chen Tao uneasily, and said, Don't be like this, when I regain my strength, I will give you whatever you want." She seemed scared. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said, "I told you, I only want you." Hearing this, Betty's eyes glowed with luster, and she said, "Ah! Let me go, let me go." Seeing Betty struggling, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile like a devil. Ha ha, Chen Tao couldn't help laughing. Fun. So much fun. Pervert, Lolacan, let me go. Betty almost burst into tears. She has lived for millions of years and has never been treated like this. In Betty's memory, she had been aloof since she was a child. How could she be as helpless as she is now? If this man wants to kill her, that's fine. After all, even though her genetic functions are gone, she still can't be killed. But the problem is, this man is a perverted Lolacan. He didn't want to kill her, he wanted to eat her. Betty has never been so panicked in her life. Although she is from the Red Dragon clan, she still has traditional dragon culture and thinking. A female dragon will be with one man all her life. If this man did something, she wouldn't know what to do. Chen Tao carried Betty to the manor and placed Betty on the big bed. As soon as Betty went to bed and regained her mobility, she hurried to the table and picked up the scissors placed on the table. She stared at Chen Tao and said, "If you dare to come near me, I will stab you to death." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled mischievously and said, "Really? That's fine, you can enjoy it." While bleeding, he slowly approached. Betty's pupils condensed. "You are so perverted. Can he be killed by stabbing him with scissors? If she couldn't be stabbed to death, wouldn't she be doomed?" "Wait a minute," Betty said quickly. Chen Tao stopped, looked at Betty in front of him, and said, "Is there anything else?" Betty looked at Chen Tao and said, "I know, you definitely don't believe that I am the Red Dragon King. I can prove it to you. I am not an ordinary person, you believe me, if you listen to me and become my subordinate. I guarantee you what you want is what you want." As she spoke, Betty pointed the scissors at her wrist. A blood stain appeared on Betty's wrist. Betty frowned in pain, she was stunned. "It hurts. What's going on?" She is the genetic body of the third generation, these scissors can actually hurt her. Seeing the blood flowing from the wound, Betty quickly threw the scissors aside. "Cover the wound with your hand." "It hurts, Betty yelled. When Chen Tao saw this scene, he was considering whether to help her. Suddenly, something strange happened. The blood that had flowed out began to flow back. Feeling this, Betty's eyes glowed with a hint of luster. She let go of her hand and saw that the wound on her wrist was healing at the speed of the naked eye. Her eyes couldn't help but light up. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Look, you've never seen this kind of scene before, have you?" I said after that, "I am the Red Dragon King and my injuries will heal on their own." Chen Tao came over, held Betty's wrist, and looked at the wound on her wrist. Seeing Chen Tao's somewhat excited look, Betty's eyes shone slightly and the corners of her mouth raised. I thought to myself, "Do you believe it now?" Chen Tao slowly let go of Betty's hand. He put his arms around Betty's waist and picked up the petite girl. Betty was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao, her face full of confusion. "What are you doing?" Chen Tao looked at Betty with a smile on his face and said with a smile, "Your body can actually repair itself. Does this mean that you will always be a virgin?" Betty's mouth formed an O shape. Her point was to let this man know that she was not an ordinary person, but this man actually fell in love with her self-recovery ability. "Pervert," Betty screamed. Betty struggled and jumped out of Chen Tao's arms. She hurried to the door, held the door with her hand, and opened it, but the door was locked. She couldn't open it with her little strength. Betty looked at Chen Tao, she looked panicked and very nervous. "You, please, don't do this. I promise, when I recover my strength, I will give you whatever you want. But I can't do it myself." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, stood up, and said, "I have money, I have everything I want, and now I am only interested in you." He stepped closer to Betty. Betty's eyes were full of despair, she gritted her teeth, and seeing Chen Tao coming, she quickly stepped aside. Chen Tao looked at Betty's uneasy look, smiled and said, "Okay, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you for now. A girl like you, of course, needs some time before you can taste her properly, so you should get familiar with the bedroom environment first, and I'll bring you some food later." As he said, Chen Tao opened the door, walked out, and slowly closed the door. Betty stood aside, watching this scene. She was slightly relieved. Fortunately, this bastard man didn't force it. Betty hurried to the door, she wanted to open the door, but it still wouldn't open. She looked around and looked at the window not far away. The window was equipped with a burglar-proof net, so she couldn't get out either. Betty bit her lip, looked around, and found that there was no place to run around, and she was suddenly a little desperate. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 230. When I regain my strength, I will castrate that damn Lolita. Betty bit her thin lower lip, looking vicious. But now, except that she can't die, she is no different from ordinary people in other aspects, and her body, with small arms and legs, is even weaker than ordinary people. Betty had no choice but to sit on the bed, leaning against the headboard, looking at the scenery outside through the floor-to-ceiling window in the distance. She couldn't do anything now. Unconsciously, time passed by little by little. Betty, who was really bored, lay on the bed and fell asleep. Crack. Suddenly, there was a movement, and Betty opened her eyes immediately when she heard the movement. She hurriedly got up, retreated to the corner of the bed, curled up her body, and looked at the door with anxiety in her big eyes. The door slowly opened, and just as Betty expected, the person who came was Chen Tao. Chen Tao was holding a dinner plate in his hand, and there was a plate on the dinner plate, and on the plate was a piece of steak. Seeing the steak, Betty's eyes shone with a hint of light, and she said, "What are you holding?" Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Betty, who looked alert, and smiled, saying, "Of course this is your lunch." "I won't eat it," Betty said hurriedly. "Who knows if this man will put some drugs in the food?" Betty herself can't figure out the current state of her body. If she eats this thing and the drug takes effect, then this man can do whatever he wants to her? Betty doesn't want that. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Betty, and he smiled and said, "If you don't want to eat, then let's do something serious." As he said this, Chen Tao put the plate on the bedside table, got on the bed, and approached Betty. Betty's eyes condensed, and she hurriedly stepped back, but there was a wall behind her. Seeing Chen Tao getting closer and closer, Betty hurriedly said, I eat, I want to eat." When Chen Tao heard this, he turned over, sat at the head of the bed, looked at her and said with a smile, "Didn't you say you didn't want to eat?" Hearing this, Betty said, "I'm suddenly hungry." If she didn't eat, this man would eat her. Choose one of the two, then Betty would not have a second choice. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Okay, then eat first." He got off the bed and looked at Betty. When Betty heard this, she pursed her lips. Seeing Betty didn't move, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Sure enough, are you still planning to exercise before eating?" Betty hurriedly said, "No, I don't want that kind of exercise, I want to eat." She stepped out of the bed and came to the edge of the bed. Seeing this, Chen Tao stretched out his hand. "No," Betty screamed. Chen Tao picked Betty up. Betty was struggling. "Don't move," Chen Tao said. Betty paused. Chen Tao said with a smile, "If you move again, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to hold back." When Betty heard this, she blushed and dared not move. Chen Tao held Betty and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the petite Betty sit in his arms. He looked at Betty sitting upright in his arms and her pale cheeks. Chen Tao was very happy, and he said with a smile, Do you know how to cut steak? Betty shook her head. She didn't even know how to cut steak, so she didn't know how to cut it. After Betty was expelled, she had been living on that desolate planet. On that planet, she devoted herself to the development of science and technology, wanting to improve science and technology as quickly as possible, and one day, destroy the dragon civilization. She worked hard for 1,000,000 years, and during this time, she had no time to enjoy anything. For her, after she upgraded to the second generation gene body, she would no longer need food. She had long forgotten the taste of food. She had never seen steak. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Then I'll help you. Just sit still." Betty didn't move, she was very obedient. Chen Tao freed his hands, took the knife and fork, cut a piece of steak with ease, and moved it to Betty's small thin lips. Chen Tao said, "Come on, open your mouth." Betty's heartbeat quickened. What to do? If this bastard put drugs in this food, then she would be finished. But if she didn't eat it now, this man would definitely not let her go. And she didn't have any strength now. This man was so tall that she was no match for him. There was no other way, Betty could only close her eyes and open her mouth slightly. Betty's mouth was very small. After opening it, you could see her pearly teeth and the little tongue between her lips and teeth. Chen Tao put the beef into her mouth. Betty ate it and chewed it subconsciously. All of a sudden, Betty opened her eyes, her ruby-like eyes lit up slightly, and she couldn't help but look at Chen Tao and said, "What is this? It's delicious." Betty was surprised. Delicious. After taking a bite, the delicious feeling filled her mouth. Betty thought she had long forgotten the taste of food, but at this moment, the delicious feeling made her taste buds jump. Delicious. Betty chewed a few bites and swallowed it. Once she swallowed it, there was nothing in her mouth. She felt her mouth secreting saliva, and her eyes were staring at the steak on the plate, her eyes full of expectation. Looking at Betty's eager look, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile. He helped her cut it again, and before letting go of her little mouth, she ate it in one bite. At this moment, Betty didn't care whether this thing was drugged or not. Delicious, delicious. This taste is simply amazing. It was so good that Betty almost jumped up. "I want more," Betty said hurriedly. Chen Tao smiled and looked at Betty. He felt that this red-haired girl was particularly cute. Simple, unpretentious, afraid is afraid, want to eat is want to eat. It's really interesting. Chen Tao helped her cut the steak and loosen the beef from her mouth. A piece of steak was quickly eaten by Betty. Chen Tao looked at Betty. Betty's face was beautiful and her appearance was even more lovely. Chen Tao leaned close to Betty's ear and could smell the unique faint fragrance on her body. This smell was really fragrant. Betty looked at the empty plate and couldn't help feeling a little disappointed. Is it gone? Betty subconsciously turned her face to look at Chen Tao. But Chen Tao was too close to her face. When Betty turned her face, their faces were too close. Their lips just happened to touch each other in the process. Chen Tao was stunned. Betty was also stunned. Chen Tao slowly let go of Betty's thin lips. Betty looked at Chen Tao, slowly retracted her gaze, but her cheeks flushed. Betty felt her heart beating wildly. Looking at Betty's dear, Chen Tao found that this girl was indeed very attractive. Her skin was as white as cream, and her figure was small. The so-called light waist and soft waist are easy to push down, which is what Betty is now. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Is it delicious?" Betty said, "Well, it's good. I haven't eaten for a long time. I thought I forgot the taste of food. This thing feels quite delicious. What is it called? I will ask someone to make some for me in the future." She looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled, and habitually put his arm around her waist, saying, "This is called steak, a special delicacy in our area. If you want, be my woman and you can eat it every day.